I know there was a lot of dynamic interaction with the speakers, and so we're glad you're getting a lot out of visiting with them. Our next speaker, when she was in medical school, was in an a cappella group called Arrhythmia. And now you might guess that she went into cardiology, but no, she went into psychiatry, and she works now as an addiction psychiatrist who has developed an intriguing idea about health equity, and it is that racism is an addiction that you can treat similar to how you might treat someone for addiction to drugs or alcohol. Please welcome Nzinga Harrison.
Thank you. I promise not to break out in song. So we know underlying addiction is trauma. And you see what we'll talk about this morning is moving beyond a trauma-informed approach to a racism-informed approach. Racism is trauma. Discrimination is trauma. Marginalization is trauma. Oppression is trauma. If you heard me say those words and you felt a physical reaction in your body, maybe a sense of relief, a sense of validation, I see you, I hear you, I am you. If you heard those words and you felt a little skeptical, like, I'm not sure I believe it, it's okay. I'm not here to convince you this morning. And although I hope to plant a seed for the next 13 minutes and 49 seconds, racism, discrimination, marginalization, oppression is trauma, and we all believe it. So why do we believe it? How do we know that's the case? We know it from the trauma of our own lived experiences with racism. We know it from the vicarious trauma we experience from the racism, discrimination, marginalization, and oppression that our patients have experienced, our colleagues, our friends, and family members. And we know it because our high school teachers taught it to us in math. No? I was like, question mark, question mark, question mark. You're like, my high school math teacher was definitely not talking about racism and trauma. I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it. Racism, discrimination, marginalization, oppression. 5 years ago, I couldn't stand on a stage and say those words all in a row, and people keep listening. Racism, discrimination, marginalization, oppression. Every time I say it, I think lions and tigers and bears, oh my. I'm like, racism, discrimination, it's too many syllables, but whatever. You get it, it's stuck in my brain, so now it's stuck in your brain, right? Before we get to your high school math teacher, let's go through a history lesson. In the 1970s, Vietnam veterans were coming back from war. This is really when the medical establishment and health system started to recognize the impact of trauma on mental and physical health. And it became an area that people were interested in learning more about. Eventually, the diagnosis of PTSD was created. And then into the 90s, it was like, oh, beyond war as a trauma, there are so many different types of traumas that people are experiencing that's affecting mental health and physical health. And it was the 1990s that Anda and Felitti gave us the gift of the ACEs study. Adverse childhood experiences, 17,000 people drawing a direct line from childhood trauma to adult mental and physical health. That really opened the idea like, oh, trauma is not just being shot at, and trauma doesn't only result in flashbacks, the concept of PTSD, but this wider set of physical and mental health conditions. And it was in 2014 that SAMHSA rolled out the first national strategy and framework for a trauma-informed approach. The trauma-informed approach gave us 3 E's: 4 R's, and 5 principles. So this is what we're going to spend the rest of our time on. 3 E's. SAMHSA said a trauma is an event or series of events that is experienced as harmful, that has lasting negative effects on mental, physical, or social well-being, also known as mental well-being. An event or series of events that is experienced as harmful, that has lasting negative effects on mental and social well-being. So let's see, do racism, discrimination, marginalization, and oppression fit the 3 E's? Is racism an event or series of events? Okay. Is discrimination experienced as harmful? Oh, nobody like, oh, you know what I need today? Some discrimination. Do marginalization and oppression have lasting negative effects on mental, physical, and social well-being? Okay. So, racism, discrimination, marginalization, oppression meet the definition of the 3 E's. This is how we get back to high school math. Do you remember if A equals B and B equals C? Say it with me. A equals C. I know it. It's like riding a bike. All the time we thought high school math, we were like, this is useless, never gonna use it. Here we are. So if trauma equals the 3 E's, and racism, discrimination, marginalization, and oppression equal the 3 E's, then A equals C. Racism, discrimination, marginalization, and oppression equal trauma. So now that we all believe it, what do? SAMHSA gives us the 4 R's. We realize, we recognize, we respond, and we resist re-traumatization. We realize, we recognize, we respond, and we resist re-traumatization. That's the commitment we make when we are building a racism, discrimination, marginalization, oppression-informed system. We realize how widespread the impact of racism is for the 100 teens that reported more than 5,600 instances of racism in only a 2-week period. We recognize for the more than 1/3 of LGBTQ people who have to hide their relationship, what the symptoms of that trauma looks like, of that discrimination. We respond by building systems that have policies, procedures, regulations, and laws that protect the more than 1/3 of Americans with physical disabilities who experience marginalization as part of their everyday existence. And we proactively seek to build systems that avoid re-traumatization for every single one of those communities I just mentioned, as well as all of the communities I haven't mentioned that have been struggling and fighting to survive and thrive under the weight of oppression generation after generation. It's a tall order, and so how do we do it? We know trauma is the 3 E's. We know what we have to do is the 4 R's. How do we do it? Thank you, SAMHSA, for giving us the 5 principles. Okay, now, here's a, secret, which is not a secret. There are actually 6 principles. And 3, 4, 5 is definitely easier, right? But it's 3, 4, 6. It started out as 5 principles, and then SAMHSA came back and added a 6th principle. So we'll go through the original 5 principles, and then I'll do a big reveal on the 6th principle. The first principle of a trauma-informed approach, this morning we're talking about a racism, discrimination, marginalization, oppression-informed approach, is safety. We have to create environments that actually are psychologically and physically safe for the people we are serving. And that environment could be a physical environment, that environment can be cultural environment, whatever. Number two, trustworthiness and transparency. I think we can all agree that the healthcare system is neither transparent or very trustworthy for many communities. I always cringe a little bit when I would hear, like during COVID, it would be like, Black people don't trust the healthcare system. And like, okay, yes, right, at the top level. But what's probably more accurate is that the healthcare system has not been transparent or trustworthy for Black people. Like, let's put the onus where the onus is, which is on the system we've created. And so trust and transparency, I didn't mean to get on a little soapbox, so I was like, Number three, peer support. Are we proactively creating opportunities for people to be with and receive support from people who have a shared lived experience? Number four, collaboration and mutuality. Y'all already know about collaboration, so I'll spend the time on mutuality, which is leveling the power dynamic. If you are designing for health on behalf of a community, you better have decision-making, power-holding voices on the board, on the executive team, on the leadership team, on the frontline staff. Frontline staff, I'm from Georgia. I'm sorry, I'm from Indiana, I live in Georgia, it's like compounded, right? Frontline staff, right? I'm not talking about an advisory board, love them, have no decisional power. Oh, amen, coroner was like, exactly. Right? Collaboration and mutuality. Number five, empowerment, voice, and choice. So when we're designing systems, we can't design for the individual. We have to design at a community level. We have to design at a population level. And so we have to make sure that even as we're designing at a community level or a population level, that we are building in operations that allow for empowerment of the voice and choice of the individual in real time. Because even though Black people this, and LGBTQ people that, and immigrants this, and Muslims that, right? Like at a community level, yes. At an individual level, you don't know me. You don't know me. You don't know what I need until you hear me, until you see me, until you are with me. Right? And so how are we building systems that empower that individual choice and voice? And then, okay, we're on number 6. Y'all ready for the big reveal? Before we get to the big reveal, I'll give you a little history of how it came to be. March 2020, we all experienced the collective trauma of watching Officer Derek Chauvin murder George Floyd right before our eyes. The country erupted, the world erupted in a collective, sustained trauma response. The CDC partnered with SAMHSA to add the 6th principle, which was historical, cultural, and gender issues. Cultural, historical, and gender issues as the 6th principle. You know what that was? That was the CDC and SAMHSA saying, oh snap, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Racism is trauma. Discrimination is trauma. Marginalization is trauma. Oppression is trauma. And so here's a call to action. I'm not gonna stand up here and be like, okay, so now all of y'all go back to your respective workplaces and implement racism, discrimination, marginalization, and oppression-informed care. That would be like unfair, right? It's a big ask. So I firmly believe that before we can walk the walk, we have to talk the talk. All I'm asking is that you tell somebody about the 3 E's, the 4 R's, and the 6 principles of a racism, discrimination, marginalization, and oppression-informed approach. For some, you'll be validating their experiences. For others, you'll be planting a seed. For everyone, you'll be making a difference. Thank you.